There's been a lot of discussion lately on whether or not Alberta is going to leave Canada. And what would happen if they did leave Canada? Did they become part of the United States to become their own thing? What sort of options are actually available to them? And guess what? Saskatchewan and parts of British Columbia are also considering it, forming a movement called Wexit, which represents essentially the major provinces of Western Canada potentially leaving. And guess what? There is an established constitutional mechanism whereby they could leave Canada. What would that mean for Canada, the United States, and them? We're going to be discussing all those various perspectives coming up on this episode of Making the Argument. I'm your host, Nick Freitas. With us in the studio, not my beautiful bride, Tina, Queen of the Bee. She's not here today because we had to make way for a Canadian spy that we captured coming across the border. In fact, we might have helped facilitate it. Connor is with us today in studio. How you doing, Connor?
I'm doing well. Thanks for asking.
So you are an official, like no kidding, Albertan.
I am an Albertan, yes.
He's an Albertan. So we're going to hear directly from the source of the resistance on what they think is actually possible here. And then, of course, also with us, our resident historian, political prognosticator, the Oracle of Virginia, sporting his Canadian paraphernalia, showing where his true loyalties lie.
He truly wants to be the socialist man.
Christian Hines.
I don't think I've worn this shirt since high school, to be honest.
So you wore it in high school?
I dug it. Yeah, a friend gave it to me as
a
friend gave it to me as a present in high school. So I dug it out of my closet to wear it I thought it was relevant for today's podcast.
Maybe so, but what would have been more relevant is if you had worn True Classic, because True Classic, the sponsor of this episode, actually understands what it is to make a t-shirt that actually fits a guy the way that they're supposed to fit us. Not to mention the fact that True Classic is now not only available online and through, our little, link in the description. You can go there to trueclassic.com/Nick. Look at some of the deals there, but you can also get it at Target and Costco now. As I have mentioned before, the reason why I love True Classic was because it was actually my wife that originally saw them and bought me some t-shirts. I was like, why do I need these? And then I started wearing them and I love it. And it's not just their t-shirts. Their workout gear is great. The shorts are great. The button downs are like my favorite now. It is what I wear. So trueclassic.com/Nick. Check out the bundles. That's like the best way to save. Check out the bundles. You don't need like super expensive designer crap. What you need is you need a company that understands how to build clothing for men to fit right, make the shoulders and chest look good, while maybe giving a little bit of excess material in areas that you're still working on, right? Trueclassic.com/Nick. Go check them out. Great company, great product.
I love how I helped tee up that ad without even being intentional about it.
Without even knowing it. So, all right, let's go ahead and frame this argument up. What is the state of Canada right now? So Connor, those of us in the United States who saw this big change, we saw this huge backlash against Justin Trudeau.
Yeah.
And a lot of us thought, all right, Canada coming back. We're seeing the conservative uprising in Canada that we've been longing for. And we were wondering how long you guys were going to allow yourself to be, ruled by Fidel Castro's illegitimate kid. But, and then he steps down and we're like, oh yeah, and then Trump makes this little comment about Canada becoming the 51st state. And you have the boomer revolt in Canada. And all of a sudden it feels like you usher in another Labor Party, and it's not like this dude is better than Trudeau.
No, he's way worse.
See, that's
every single way.
So the Americans right now are sitting there going like, okay, we get it. Everybody was mad about what Trump said. We were big fans of Pierre Poilievre. I thought he was one of the more like articulate conservatives, especially when it came to dealing with the press. And so we kind of wondered like, okay, maybe we just called it wrong in Canada. But now Alberta seriously lowered the threshold for what it takes to get it on the ballot to actually have a referendum to leave Canada.
Yeah.
Saskatchewan seems to have a somewhat serious movement. Is this real, or is this just kind of like hyped up, people mad and like jockeying for position?
I would say there's an element of this being real.
Okay.
There is genuine discontent in the West.
Okay.
In Alberta, nobody likes the East. Nobody likes the current tax system. Nobody likes equalization.
Well, to give everyone an idea, equalization is essentially this element within the Canadian Constitution, which takes the tax revenue from the various provinces and then essentially does redistribution of wealth based off of where, and so Alberta represents, I think you represent somewhere around 12% of the population of Canada, but you represent like 15% of the wealth of Canada.
It's about 17 to 19%, depending on how you grade GDP.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, and basically what that means is like every year around tax time, Alberta is basically having a ton of money taken out of the province and then given to Quebec, Ontario, basically the East.
All the Maritimes. Yeah.
Yeah. So basically the far more like left-wing liberal provinces get a lot of money due to equalization payments from the far more conservative Western provinces. Is that fair?
That's a fair statement without going into the weeds. Yes.
Okay. So that's kind of what equalization is. But then so right off the bat, you can see a problem with wait a second, but it goes deeper than that, because if you look at the source of a lot of Alberta's wealth, it's oils, minerals, it's all the things that the eastern provinces, which depend on the equalization payments from Alberta, then simultaneously get up and make it more and more difficult for you to do the things which actually create the wealth that which actually benefits them. Is that accurate?
That is accurate. Yeah.
So because obviously it's like, oh, we need more green energy, we need more this, we need more that. Then here's the other question. You guys are also getting slammed with some of the stuff as a result of the immigration policy.
Yep.
I mean, is that really impacting Alberta though? Like,
It's impacted it quite a bit. Like, Christian, do you have the?
Yeah. So you're gonna be blown away at some of these statistics here. Here's one thing that I pulled recently. This is the population chart of Alberta going back to several decades.
So it looks like 2010, they were sitting around 3.5 million people in the province of Alberta. And now in January 2024, you're at 5 million.
5 million.
Yeah.
With a huge jump in 2022. I'm assuming that's a lot of immigration.
Almost exclusively immigration. Like, I think Alberta actually does have replacement population. Alberta's got one of the healthiest demographics actually across all of Canada. But this is almost exclusively.
It's actually even crazier than
replacement birth rate is 2.1 lives birth per woman.
Yeah.
And if you were at 3.5 million in January of 2010, and you have let's say a slightly above replacement birth rate, you would not be at 5 million people. That math don't math. So this is largely immigration from other provinces within Canada, or is this international?
This is almost exclusively international immigration that's facilitated through the federal government. And then even just between 2020 and 2025, 1 million of those people came in, which has put a tremendous strain on our healthcare system. It's
so like 20% of your province's population.
Yes.
So a lot of these numbers are from 2016 to 2021. When I picked up Connor at the airport, we were having a conversation about this, and I ended up doing some research, and this is what I uncovered. In 2021, so this was 4 years ago, there was 1 million immigrants in Alberta. That's 25% of the entire province's population.
This is when it was 4 million people in Alberta.
This is before, remember, and they weren't really importing a bunch of people in 2021 because the Canadians had shut their entire country down because of COVID. And so when you look at the population change since then, it was 25% going into, the lockdowns, the trucker convoy protests and everything. The mass migration really ramped up after 2021. And here's the evidence to show this. You're going to be shocked when you see this chart. This is the Canadian immigration chart.
Oh, that's insane.
So here's where they are right now. And this is the historical average, which was, 200,000, 150 to 250,000 was the kind of
And it just jumped
average.
up to over 2.5 million.
Now it's like 2.5 million.
Wow.
And in all of that, you see this dip here? That's the COVID lockdowns. And so everything was post 2020. Effectively. Now, granted, again, Trudeau was elected in 2015, so he had 5 years to import quite a few people. And you see this chart was rising since 2015. It was rising, right? It broke out of the historical trajectory. But I mean, everything since 2022
it's to the moon.
Wow.
They're going through literal replacement right now.
So okay.
Yeah.
So obviously you had a backlash as a result of, because at the same time he was doing this, a Canadian Constitution. So I'm old enough to remember Justin Trudeau getting out there going, no, we have a gun culture in Canada. We're not going to take your guns. And then lo and behold, through essentially executive order,
yes,
that's exactly what he did. Like he didn't go out and take everybody's guns. He made it illegal to buy a handgun.
They were this close to taking everybody's guns, and then thankfully there was about 2 million letters written from the gun owners in Canada pushing back on it.
Yeah.
They didn't push back so much that they actually overturned stuff that had been done, which is unfortunate, but they did stop. It was going to be a complete gun ban. It ended up being something that just took away, like, okay, there's going to be no more pistols. There's no more new pistols. There's going to be no more certain numbers of rifles, stuff like that. So it wasn't as bad as it could be, but there's nobody pushing back to go, okay, we need to reestablish the baseline. It's just, oh, good. Not everything got taken away.
So they were satisfied with just stopping it in its tracks.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's dangerous, because that's always how this works. That's always how the Hegelian dialectic works, as it becomes the new normal and they push it.
So, the last point on the immigration thing that I want to say is that from 2016 to 2021, before this took place, Alberta ended up importing, although you could argue that it wasn't the wishes of Alberta, but Alberta ended up importing the population equivalent of its third and fourth largest cities in 5 years, from 2016 to 2021. Nuts. So that's Red Deer and Lethbridge combined, which again are the third and fourth largest. Most Americans, when they think of Alberta, they think of Calgary and Edmonton, which are the two largest cities. But yeah, they imported the population equivalent of their third and fourth combined. That's 200,000 people in 5 years. And remember, that's before the floodgates were opened up really after COVID.
Yeah. So, and here's the other thing I think is important to remember about, you look at the United States. The United States, you could argue that there's a broader American culture, but then there's also very significant and stark differences in regional cultures within the United States. You have the South broadly. Florida has its own culture, right? You have New England, you have the Midwest, you have the West Coast, you have Texas, which has its own thing, right? And these regional cultures are, again, very distinct, very easy to recognize and spot, both from the perspective of what defines them and how they differ from the other cultures. Similar in Canada, right? Like, the East is very different from the West, but then you also got Quebec, which is this, the entire French. That was the first source of a province actively working to leave Canada. And in fact, they got so close to actually achieving it that's why the Canadian Supreme Court went through this process of determining what would be a constitutional, peaceful mechanism for separating from Canada. Yeah. But when you look specifically, in my view, Saskatchewan, tell me if I'm wrong.
Sure.
Saskatchewan, Alberta, I think very much has its own culture.
I would agree. Yeah.
I think Saskatchewan seems to have similar attributes.
By and large, yes.
Yeah. And then rural British Columbia seems to have, it feels like it's its own thing.
It is a bit,
but there's common sentiment.
There's common sentiment. It is a little different because it's more, you got more mountain folks, and that plays into the culture aspect. But anything that's west of the Canadian Shield, so anything essentially Manitoba and west, is a distinct culture from the east side of the Shield, which is like Ontario, Quebec, Maritimes.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So you have cultural considerations. You have this immigration policy, which is obviously impacting you guys both economically and culturally, and then you also have the economic factors. Is that you guys are, again, Alberta is paying a ton of taxes that you don't get the direct benefit from. It literally goes to benefit provinces that vote against you. Yeah. And I don't mean just vote against you in the broader sense of you guys would want a more conservative government, they want a more liberal government. I mean, they vote against the very industries that you rely upon for the wealth that they then take from you.
Yeah, they put in taxes that specifically target, it's called a carbon tax. Yeah. But it specifically targets anything to do with essentially fossil fuels. Anything that's directly related to the oil, or like, for example, if you're paying at a gas station, you're paying a tax because you're using oil. Yeah. Anything, and part of it too is because Canada's very much embraced the green agenda and a lot of the talking points by WEF. World Economic Forum. Yeah. And it's having a major impact on the economic viability of Canada going into the future.
Okay. Well, and that does explain where like Canada's has some been largely stagnant in many respects, and with the exception of places like Alberta.
Not even stagnant. Our real GDP has fallen. It's over year.
So, okay. So when we look at all of those factors,
you want to look at the GDP chart? And
yeah, wow.
Yeah, it's bad.
Like GDP per capita in Canada has just GDP per capita in Canada has not just flatlined, it's actually begun to drop. And look at the gap now that's emerged between the United States and our northern neighbor.
Well, and again, what I find interesting about this is that one of the reasons why they usually justify immigration is if you don't have a sufficient birth rate, you immigrate a population to be able to make sure that you can fulfill all like vacant job slots and stuff like that. That doesn't seem to be going on in Canada. Like this doesn't. I mean, your housing costs in Canada, especially in Ontario, around Toronto and stuff like, are just ridiculous.
Well, part of it is because we're artificially driving up the numbers because we're importing people that buy those houses, but we're trying to play it's essentially just propping up markets like, for example, the housing bubble. We never had a correction from 2008. We had like some minor stuff, but we didn't have the big correction that you guys had down here. And you even saw this in the last election where the majority of boomers voted for Carney and to continue the status quo, because it still props up in large part the housing market. Because for most, whereas in the US you'd use a business as an investment vehicle, or you make a business, or you just actually invest in real value.
Yeah,
a lot of that same money, the money that could have been gone into business, whether creating jobs or stuff for the local economy, will just go into, we can invest in real estate. And so you have these massively, especially on the east and the west coast, so think Vancouver, Toronto.
Yeah.
You have a massively inflated housing bubble. Like even Vancouver, 30%, this per the city of Vancouver's report, 30% of the houses are unoccupied. They're owned, but they're used as investment vehicles. Yeah.
Oh, we've got something to show you on this. If you want to know how bad the Canadian housing crisis is, well, Nick, for the price of 110% of the median Canadian's salary, you too can be the proud owner of a 147 square foot parking lot.
This is real.
In Vancouver.
Not parking lot, parking space.
Parking space
in a tower.
I was looking up, we were talking about this last night, Connor and I was like, how bad is the real estate market in Vancouver? And he's like, well, pull it up on Zillow. So I pulled it up on Zillow. This is the first thing I ran into.
$75,000 for a parking space.
Yes. And we were laughing for like 3 minutes straight. They're selling parking spaces. This is at least, depending on how you want to measure it, 10% more than the annual income of Canadians.
Median income.
For a 147 square foot parking space.
Okay.
Yeah. Oh, by the way, you also have to pay a $41 a month HOA fee for this.
Oh my gosh. $41 a month HOA to maintain. Oh my God.
Just add a little salt into that wound.
Yeah. Well, and again, this is in Vancouver. This is in British Columbia. It's not in Toronto.
Oh, here's another one for $89,000. So that's actually the cheapest. By the way, Nick, that was the cheapest parking space. That was the cheapest parking space in Vancouver.
That is nuts.
When you just look at like the newest homes on the market, here you go, $2 million. In Vancouver.
Well, that's an 11-bed, 4-bath. But it's only 2,200
square feet.
If you're looking, so I lived in Vancouver probably the first 10 years of my life before my family moved to Alberta. If you're looking at the city of Vancouver proper, most homes start at least 1 million Canadian dollars, but the average homes is about
1.9 million.
And that's old, and it's
Look
decrepit.
At this.
That's insane.
Part of it is because it just costs so much in terms of zoning and permitting, to actually do anything there that you have to recoup the cost somehow.
Yeah, the regulatory burden makes it very difficult.
Here you go, 1.7 million for. Look at this. Look at this piece of junk that's
3-bedroom, 2-bath, 1,500 square foot, almost 1.7 million.
So this is about 1.3 USD.
So I believe that it was the if you go back to the 2025 election where Pierre lost to Mark Carney,
yeah,
one of the things that Pierre was talking about in the lead up to that election before it changed to other topics was it actually costs more to build a house in Vancouver when you look at the permitting process.
Yes.
Than it does
the actual
the
materials and
building
labor.
process of
Yeah.
the house itself.
Yeah, the government. This is nothing that just drives me nuts. The cost of dealing with the government, the cost of getting permission from the government to build is more than the actual materials and labor itself and building the house. And yet, people are still begging for. Well, we need the government to come in and subsidize it. Like, do you recognize that if the government just wasn't doing the crap they were doing, your house's pricing would like cut by more than half?
Oh yeah.
Like, anyway, okay, so it's understandable why Canadians in general would be pissed. And like we said before, when we looked at the polling from this, it was the boomers that already owned their home that largely came in and said, the most important part to me is someone that will stand up to Donald Trump. Whereas younger voters were like, the most important thing to me is I would love to be able to move out of my parents' basement.
Yeah.
Right. But it's like impossible to do when, the cheapest house, I can't afford a parking space, forget a house. Right. And it's not because I'm not working. It's not because I'm not trying hard enough. Like, I am working at the sort of job for the sort of pay that you would anticipate for somebody to be 23, 24, 25 working at. And I'm looking at this going, there's just no way.
Yeah.
There's just no way. So, all right. So you can understand all the frustration, especially from, again, conservative provinces that draw the straight line between the policy and the problems.
Yeah.
Right. The boomers are like, I don't got a problem because my housing, the cost of the house I bought for, $30,000 in 1984. Right, is now worth $3 million in Montreal. I'm doing fine.
Yeah.
Right. But for the people that are saying no, there's a reason why this happens. They've properly diagnosed the problem. They've associated it with the policies. There's obviously a lot of frustration and desire to want to do something about it. Now, the first big manifestation we saw of our very, very polite neighbors to the north saying, screw this, right, was the trucker convoy.
Yeah.
And again, we saw a couple of things there. Now, I want to be intellectually honest about this.
Yes.
Typically speaking, when we see people protest in the United States and they're blocking traffic, right, or they're doing things like that, we get very frustrated because it's usually on the left. And we get very frustrated with this idea that, dude, you're standing in the way of people trying to get to work, right? And so there's a part of me that when I look at the trucker convoy, I totally agree with the frustration of why the truckers were doing this, because they had been uniquely and very specifically targeted in ways that was very frustrating. You saw the farmers doing the same thing in the Netherlands.
Well, actually, so the farmers did that in the Netherlands after the trucker convoy. So the trucker convoy, two things. It was in part a response to the whole COVID debacle.
Yeah.
But more importantly, it was in response to the erosion of civil liberties and the crackdown on free speech, the crackdown on the ability to actually assemble in any meaningful capacity without having a police state watch you. Autonomy.
So I guess it was one. So okay, if I understand this correctly, this is not as simple as, again, when it comes to things like blocking traffic. Like in the Netherlands, farmers were doing it because they were literally creating the government was literally creating conditions where they were 30% of the farmers were going to lose their property. Like that was it. You're done.
Yeah.
Because and it was unsustainable, like totally unsustainable. And the farmers felt like nobody is paying attention to what is actually going on and what it means. In large part because you had a lot of people in the cities voting for these policies with no concept of the fact that if these farms go out of business, you don't eat, jackass, right? And so they were trying to draw attention to it. You're saying that in Canada, you had this wasn't like a singular issue.
It wasn't purely economical. No.
This was basically a wide set of grievances, and they had gotten to the point where they felt that the normal mechanisms that you use to protest, because this is one of the things that infuriates Americans about people stopping traffic in the United States. It's like you have ample areas to protest, to do whatever you want, to say whatever you want to. It's not as if you are having your rights restricted to protest. You're choosing to do it in the most difficult way possible, as opposed to all of the other ways you could do it and get your message across. You're saying that in Canada, part of the reason why the trucker convoy chose the type of protest they did was because the government had cracked down so much on the typical means to protest that it was almost like it was a last effort last ditch effort.
It was, and it was also a thing where it's like, okay, we're gonna have a protest. The only way, especially because a lot of this is there's a lot of wounds in the West. It's like the only way any Western voices are going to be heard is we actually go to on Ottawa itself, which is the capital of Canada, and it's a capital city. It's appropriate to have protests there. It's like part of living in a capital is that it's more political function, and you gotta roll with that.
Yeah.
And there was no vandalism, there was no looting, there was no rioting. All the trash was collected. It was peaceful the entire time. Nobody did anything stupid with firearms. The only time, basically, it only got violent once the Canadian police decided, okay, we don't want this anymore. We're going to cut the local communications. We're going to cut the internet. We're going to get rubber bullets. We're going to get actual bullets, though I can't recall if they used them, but I know they got horses. They stampeded old women. There was one old grandmother who got trampled by a horse. I think she lived. I can't quite recall. But it was not only that, but then they enacted Emergency Measures Act, which is the equivalent of just saying, okay, we're doing martial law. So that means they froze bank accounts. I know people who have bank accounts frozen from that just because they even sent $50 to support the truckers. It's like, oh, because initially it's like, okay, this is Canada-wide measure. We need to actually just help and say, hey, we support this, what they're protesting for, because they're doing it in a good manner, peaceably, and we want to help out. And you even saw Elon just poking at the nest and just going, this is something interesting. And
so the response to it was, again, they came down. And I think that was another thing, too, that made it sympathetic is that we watch because we see this in big cities in the United States. We see it in the UK. We see it in Canada, where when the left decides to burn down cities, the police don't take anywhere near as strong a stance as when you have a conservative-oriented protest that may still be engaging in civil disobedience. This is an important thing. It's not that they didn't break any laws. They did.
No, it was civil disobedience.
Yeah, it was civil. They did break laws, but it's the police response to a conservative protest where civil disobedience takes place versus what happens when the left either engages in civil disobedience or just violent criminal activity, right? That's the difference. Civil disobedience is I am violating the law, but it's because I think the particular law might be unjust or because it's the only way to get your attention. But I'm not necessarily hurting people in the process of doing so.
Think Martin Luther King.
Yeah. I'm going to set your city on fire because I think you're racist. That goes beyond civil disobedience, and that becomes a riot. That becomes civil unrest. So again, the government's response to this and the difference with the way that they handle left-wing protests versus right-wing protests, I think resonated with a lot of people in the United States, where we would say that even if we acknowledge that, okay, there were rules that were broken by the trucker convoy, we understand why they broke them. And the government's response to them was very, very different than the way they respond to the left.
Yeah.
So does that give kind of what are some, in order to frame up why is this happening and why are we at this stage where, again, this is not simply a couple of protest groups in Alberta saying we want to leave. This is not like we look at things in the United States where we talk about the state of Jefferson or the Greater Idaho Project, where it's, we're going to give these conservative parts of these states and they're going to band together and form another state or a super state. And it's and we all know it isn't happening.
No.
Right? We all know it isn't happening. But this appears that something could really happen from this. Have we done it? Have we done an appropriate job of framing it to where everyone watching now who maybe has no idea what's going on in Alberta or Canada can look at this and say, okay, I get the reasons why this movement has started and why it has actual validity.
I would say the last thing I would touch on would be what's happening right now with the organizer of the Freedom Convoy. Her name's Tamara Litch.
Yeah.
She right now is, I don't know if we have an article on this, Christian, but right now she's facing, they're being sued. She's being sued by the feds for $300 million, and she's facing potential jail time right now. The latest that's been reported is about 7 years for mischief and 1 day for, what is it? I believe it's for Christian, if you have it.
Terrorism.
Terrorism.
Wait.
1 day on a terrorism charge just so they can pin a terrorism charge to her.
So they are deliberately going after her. They're trying to essentially destroy
Yes.
her in any way they can.
Yeah.
Because once you're arrested for a terrorism charge, the article never reads, oh, this was a witch hunt where they play. No, the article always reads convicted terrorist.
And then
That's what the Wikipedia article will
yes,
say.
Yeah.
In Canada, almost every single news outlet is funded by taxpayer dollars.
Yeah.
At the majority of their budgets. And so whether they intentionally mean it or not, some do, like CBC intentionally just supports the government. Their hands are tied. They cannot do effective journalism that is nonpartisan.
Well, their budget depends on who's in power.
Yes.
Okay.
I think
So-
that set the stage pretty well.
All right. So that definitely explains why people would be very, very frustrated. By the way, speaking of injustices, I just got back from a conference in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, with a wonderful organization called Live Action. Live Action is one of the premier pro-life organizations in the country. They're not just fighting the battle politically, they're fighting it culturally, and they do it very, very well. If you look at the videos, if you look at the street interviews, if you look at the various questioning that they do, their videos get around 40 million hits per month. And when you look at the sort of content that they do, it actually changes minds. They will show you the receipts. They will show you the videos of somebody coming up to them expressing how pro-choice or pro-abortion they are. And then when they actually sit through and watch some of the videos and hear some of the testimony that Live Action makes available, minds and hearts do get changed on this issue. And again, I have had the privilege of working with them for years. I'm a huge fan. Plus, they have some new strategies going forward. They are doubling down. Even though we're all excited that Planned Parenthood finally got defunded for 1 year, if we don't actually stay on top of this, that funding could be right back next year. And Live Action is one of the organizations that is going to make sure that it doesn't. So what I want you to do right now is I want you to consider teaming up with Live Action, donating them $20.25. If you donate a monthly gift of $20.25, as a thank you, they're going to send you this handy dandy Save the Babies coffee mug. We all know how I feel about my coffee mugs, right? Plus, you're going to be helping an outstanding organization. If you want to learn more, text NICK. That's text NICK to 70723. Text NICK to 70723. Learn more about what Live Action is doing. Again, I cannot endorse this organization enough. They do incredibly important work, and they do it well. Go ahead and text Nick to 70723 and consider joining. Sign up for a monthly gift, $20.25. They're going to send you the coffee mug. But more importantly, you're going to be doing a lot to actually help save innocent, defenseless human life with Live Action. Okay. All right. So now we've got the question of what do the people that are angry about the government really want? Because I imagine you got some people that they don't want to leave Canada. They don't want to go through the spot. They just want Ottawa to properly reflect their concerns and adjust to it. I imagine you got other people that they're like, no, we're done. Yeah. We're done. Alberta needs to be its own thing. So if we got those two camps, one camp being, no, we're loyal Canadians. We just need to vote harder. Right? You got another camp probably saying, no, screw that. It ain't going to work. We just want to be the Republic of Alberta or whatever it might be. Is there any other camps we need to be considering on this?
I would say those are the two main camps, but
is there anybody that, for instance, says, no, we want to leave Canada and join the United States?
There are camps that want to join the United States. So yeah, there's a camp that wants to join the U.S. There's a camp that wants Alberta to be its own sovereign nation state. Mm-hmm. And there's technically there's four camps. Ones that just want the status quo and are because it's safe and comfortable and they don't have to risk anything. There's ones that want to essentially negotiate a new deal with, not necessarily negotiate a new deal with Canada, but just have Alberta assert all their legal Canadian rights that they already have. So, for example, province of Quebec, the one that takes the majority of like equalization dollars and stuff like that, everything they're doing is illegal. Every single other province can do it. Alberta can do it. Alberta's just not doing it right now. Like even Canadian provinces have the legal authority, whereas states do not. to enforce their own immigration policy, which Quebec does.
Oh, wait, whoa. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, in the United States, we can't do that. So
No.
you're saying Alberta can prevent the immigration of people from other provinces into Alberta?
They could do that tomorrow.
Really?
And Alberta has majority conservative government. They could do that tomorrow if they wanted to.
Oh, okay. So this is interesting. So okay. So let me kind of reclass this. So step one was the status quo people. They don't see a big problem, right? Because obviously not everyone in Alberta is a conservative. Group two is not just we want Ottawa to hear us out. Group two is the Canadian Constitution permits us to have far more control over our province than we're currently exercising.
Correct.
And we want to take advantage of it.
So that includes immigration policy. That includes trade policy. Alberta can and has the legal mechanisms due to Canadian law to set up their own essentially quasi-embassies around the world to conduct trade policies with different states, not nation states. That's still a federal thing. But if there's, for example, let's say the government of Canada is negotiating a trade deal with Germany, and this is what Quebec's been doing, Quebec demands that they have a seat at the table, and no deal is signed unless Quebec is satisfied. Every single province has that right to do it, but only Quebec exercises that right.
Oh, this is okay. So this is a huge revelation for me because, again, I obviously understand that there's significant differences between the Canadian model and the United States model, but we both came from the British, Commonwealth or the British Empire. So that the ability for Canadian provinces to act autonomously or independent of the federal government is significantly more substantial than it is in the United States.
Yes.
Okay, so you got one movement that's saying like we just need to exercise this, and then you have the movement that's saying we want to leave and become our own thing, and then you have the movement that says we want to leave and maybe become part of the United States.
Correct.
So out of those four, I'm going to ask two different questions on this.
Sure.
Out of those four categories, which one actually has the most support, do you think?
Out of those four categories, I would say right now, I would say the default, everybody's default, because a lot of this just isn't known. Everybody's default is, I guess we just got to vote harder. But everybody's been seeing that that's not working. I would say if people knew, I would say the most popular option would just be to, okay, you know what, then let's just do what Quebec's been doing and let's enforce it. Let's take charge of how taxes are collected, which they have the authority to do, which would change how much money is sent to Ottawa through equalization. Because right now, the reason why so much is sent there is because oil tax revenues.
Yeah. So wait a second. You're saying that the Alberta, and this is kind of similar to how things used to be in the United States to some degree before the 16th Amendment to the Constitution, which allowed the federal collection of the income tax. It used to be that with the exception of things like tariffs and other funding mechanisms of the federal government, the states raised taxes. Yeah. And then it was almost like, Christian, correct me if I'm not explaining this well. The states collected the taxes, and essentially the federal government was collecting taxes from the states, not the individuals in the states.
Right.
That obviously drastically changed with the implementation of the 16th Amendment to the Constitution. Now, that's not to say that the federal government didn't still have mechanisms to get money directly from people, but that was typically it was from the states to the feds, or through mechanisms like tariffs, which was just, they got it before it got into the United States. You're saying that in Canada, does the Canadian government tax the oil revenue, or does Alberta tax it and then have to send it to Ottawa?
Canada, to my best recollection right now, Canada taxes it directly. So, for example, when Alberta sends oil down to the Gulf of America and sells it to Texas, and Texas buys it in U.S. dollars, those dollars on their way back up to Canada, they do not go straight back to Alberta. They first get so basically, government of Canada takes their chunk of the money out of it as it comes back. Yeah. Alberta, if they wanted to, they can take, because Quebec has done this with for example, their hydroelectric system. Yeah. They privatized the company that owned it, so that way, basically, they would be in charge of the what is it? Okay, I'm blanking on that. I'll leave that for now.
Yeah. But basically, there's a legal mechanism where if they restructured the way that the oil was sold,
or if they restructured the way the oil was sold, or if instead of collecting payment from the U.S. in dollars, instead they collected it in bitumen and just stored it back in Alberta, then it would mean that the federal government could not actually collect taxes on those until something was done with the oil, for example, and made into a new product.
Okay. So, all right. So within the 4 categories, let's leave out the, become part of the United States, right? Because that just probably not going to happen. There's way too many things. Let's look at for a second the leaving Canada itself. So I did some research on this, and it looks like there's a 6-step process for legally leaving Canada. And here's what I found. The first couple of steps made sense, right? Like you got to have a referendum, you got to ask an obvious question that makes the fact that you're voting to separate very, very clear. But then when you start to get into like steps 4, 5, and 6, what you find out is that Alberta can vote to leave all day long, but if Ottawa doesn't want them to, they're not going to. That's what I mean. Quebec gets a say in whether or not Alberta gets to leave. And why would a province which benefits greatly from Alberta's wealth ever vote to let them leave?
Yeah.
And so, I mean, is that so? For all this talk about leaving Canada, is it kind of understood by a lot of people that this is a much more difficult task than just voting in a referendum in Alberta?
Most people don't understand it's that complicated, but for the way it's usually pitched, especially in media, and in part because Canadian political parties have way less operational budgets than American ones, just due to how laws are structured around that. They can't get as much money, for example. A lot of people just don't know this stuff. So they don't know that, voting for a referendum, like if we voted to leave, they don't know that, it just won't actually work because it's been made, the path to leaving the country has been made so tangled that it's effectively impossible.
Yeah. Well, and that's what I said. It's like it typically when you look at a government as almost like a contract, because that's how the Confederacy of the United States looked at their joining the United States, is that we're a sovereign entity and we're joining the United States, and if we choose to leave the United States, well, that's our decision.
Yeah.
And the Civil War, not legally, but through a war, determined that no, you're not going to do that, right? Like once you're a part of the United States, you're a part of the United States, right? In Canada, what they came up with when Quebec got so close to passing their referendum was, we've got to seriously map out a process for how this looks to where you could peacefully separate. But again, the legal mechanism, the legal structure they created effectively makes it impossible unless the rest of the country is willing to say it's okay.
Yeah.
So it would be like if we had one state in the United States that wanted to separate from the U.S., but the only way they could do it is if a majority of the other states approved it, and then you'd have to go through a convoluted legal process to determine what that would even look like, because you have to detangle certain legal institutions from that state and this one.
Yeah.
And so even if you had not just a majority vote in Alberta to leave the country, but you had a majority vote in the Canadian Parliament to leave the country, that still doesn't mean you can leave. You now have to go through these additional processes of determining what leaving looks like and who owns what and what sort of trade arrangements on there, what sort of like you'd have to decide all of that. So
all of this assuming that there's no armed revolution.
Right.
This is the peaceable option.
Yeah, this is the peaceable option. But so let me ask you this. If Alberta has the ability to actually flex its muscles a lot more as a part of Canada, and basically do some things that Quebec is already doing, and the legal process for leaving is so difficult, why do you think Alberta's premier she seems to be endorsing the process of the referendum? Is that for show? Or is that because she thinks there's some sort of value in having the vote, even if it doesn't really translate into leaving Canada? Like, what do you think? I mean, I know I'm asking you to look into her mind right now, but what do you think her motivation is for going through this process, as opposed to doing the other things that you just mentioned, which theoretically they could do right now? They have the votes to do right now.
from what I can see, it's, well, for starters, she actually, a couple months ago, reduced the barrier for a vote. It used to be you need, I think,
she cut it in half. It was like over 200,000 people had to like sign on for the to get a referendum. And now it's like half that.
It's been halved.
Yeah.
And then with the referendum, it's not only going to be just that one question, there will be a few other questions on it.
Oh. What? Okay, so what other questions did they add? Or
I don't know. They haven't been announced yet.
Oh, they haven't figured it out.
But it's a thing where not only have you diluted the how many people it would basically it would at least be signed on in the minimum, you're also muddying the waters, so it's not a clear-cut question.
Yeah.
And after that, from what I can see, it's not actually in her interests to have Alberta become
independent.
And not necessarily even independent, but just assert their rights as they have as Canadians.
So so this is interesting because I think most people, Danielle Smith, right, Premier of Alberta, most people have this idea that she's very conservative.
Yeah.
And that seems to be reflected in much of what she has done and how she is governed. So I'm not doubting that. However, I've also been in conservative politics in the United States long enough to know that not everyone that vocally presents as conservative acts as a conservative behind closed doors. So I'm going to say this right now. I'm not accusing Premier Smith of anything.
Yeah.
But I would, again, as someone that's been a legislator for 10 years and watched how these processes develop, one of the things I look for is whenever the government is whenever something big is going to happen. So for instance, this idea of we're going to have a referendum to potentially leave Canada. That's huge. That's monumental. And you say, we're going to drop the threshold for requesting this referendum from 200 some odd thousand to 100 some odd thousand. That's significant. You have significantly reduced the threshold to be able to get this as a question before the Canadian people. But to your point, all right, so again, if I'm thinking about this politically, I'm like, I am demonstrating to every frustrated Alberta, which is a total majority.
Yeah, it's a complete majority.
Yeah, complete majority of Albertans are frustrated. To the degree that they're frustrated, we'll find out.
Yeah.
But I'm demonstrating to all of them that I hear them and I'm taking positive action because I cut the threshold in half. That's significant. However, if I don't really want it to be successful, I start to change the nature of, because again, changing the threshold for getting onto the ballot doesn't mean you change the threshold for what it takes to win.
Correct. Or what demonstrates a clear majority of Albertans.
Yes. So what I'm saying is that, let me caveat again, not saying Danielle Smith is doing this.
And it goes for me as well.
Yeah. So not saying she's doing this. However, one of the things a politician could do if they want to appear to support something without actually supporting it is make it easier to go out to a vote under conditions where you know it will fail.
Yeah.
And one of those conditions could be we're going to add additional questions because like you said, like I've gotten into this before when it came to things like tax cut bills where I wanted to completely eliminate a tax. Well, we're going to do this graduated thing here over 3 years with certain income bracket. I said, that's a guaranteed way to kill what you're trying to do because now the messaging is confused. People don't even know if they qualify. They don't even know what they're actually doing or what. And the more confusion you add to something, the less clear it becomes, the more likely people are to say no for obvious reasons, right? If it's just, do you want to separate? Do you not want to separate? That's a clear-cut question. We can now debate this.
Yes.
What you've also done is you've given other people who are, let's say, conservative elected officials or conservative voices, what you now do is you allow for the imposition of poison pills.
Yes.
So when it's just a straight up question, leave or not leave, and now I'm voting yes or no, I now have to justify my vote to people, right? Mm-hmm. Now this is a referendum, so it's directly to them. But as we argue for it, if I'm arguing against something that the majority of my constituents want for reasons that are very clear, and I'm in opposition, I now have to explain a very, very difficult position. If you add on 3 or 4 additional things, I can now come out and say, I am completely for a clean referendum. But that's not what we got here. We got these other questions. And question 4 is the reason why I can't support this move. And now all of a sudden, the reality, now look, maybe that's true of some people, right?
Yeah.
Again, I'm not, but there's going to be some people that they don't want this referendum.
Mm-hmm.
They know they can't oppose the referendum, but they know they can oppose question 3.
Yes.
And the next thing you know, oh God, grr, I wish we could get what we wanted, but unfortunately they added this thing in here and that's just not good. I've seen this crap too many times to not pose it as a question on whether or not that's the true intention of changing the way that they're actually doing this referendum. Okay, so happy to give Danielle Smith the benefit of the doubt because I don't know.
Yeah, and I don't know either.
But people should ask that question.
Connor, you and I, when we were talking about this episode a few days ago, you told me that one of the biggest problems that you see in your home province is that there's too many politicians that view getting elected to, say, the
federal office.
Yeah. Getting elected to provincial office, right, in Alberta, as just a stepping stone to federal office in Ottawa.
There's a lot of people that look at it like a career, not necessarily you are responsible for safeguarding your province, essentially. And
that creates kind of a perverse incentive if you think about it, because what you end up having is a bunch of people that they know that it's a conservative province. They know that they're going to have to run under a certain party to get elected. Mm-hmm. But their real goal is not what's in the best interests of Alberta. It's what's in the best interests of my future political career in federal office in Ottawa. I want to become prime minister one day, right? And I'm gonna use these Western provinces as the mechanism to get elected prime minister. And so what you've changed is, and we get this problem occasionally in the United States where it's like people run for governor or they run for senator and they don't give a damn about the state that they're actually getting elected to. Yeah. What they care about is they want to go to DC.
Well,
right?
and let's face it, the problem that we have in the United States is the federal government has become so all encompassing in a way that it never was before.
Not even designed to be that way.
Yeah, not designed to be that way. But ever since kind of the 30s, it's taken on a much more prominent role in things that used to be reserved for the states. And so it is seen as a natural progression to run for state office to then one day run for federal office. And I imagine there's a similar motivation within Canada. Now, the thing I will, but this kind of leads to the question, right? Like if that's all you want to do, well, then this referendum is not necessarily helpful to that purpose. But if being seen to be at least generally supportive of the referendum is critical to your current political office and your future aspirations, then the question is how do you design this in such a way to where you can have your cake and eat it too, right?
Yes.
I can purport to support the referendum while at the same time creating conditions where I know it can't succeed. And so now I maintain my base.
Yeah.
But then, especially if there's any working with other people on the other side of the aisle to make sure that it's not successful, you've also signaled to them that, hey, I may be mad, but I'm reasonable.
Yeah.
And so now you're not persona non grata within the establishment.
Yeah.
I mean, that's kind of what you're getting to with this, right?
Well, I mean, part of the problem that I see is not just the whole stepping stone to federal politics, and so therefore we don't actually really care about local interests. I think this is also tied into what Connor was bringing up earlier about there's a lot of people in Alberta or Saskatchewan, for that matter, that just don't really know that they can play the same hardball that the Quebecois were playing just a few decades ago, and they haven't done it. Connor gave me this document that I want to briefly show our listeners, especially those who actually live in Canada, that this directly affects them. This paper was written just a few months ago, actually by a guy named Ben Trudeau. No, apparently no relation.
Or is he actually distant relation?
Distant relation. Okay, so
he is initially from Quebec, but he's in Alberta now.
So he describes in this, and it's a long paper. I'm not going to go through the entire thing, but he describes his background. He's from Quebec. He actually participated, if I recall, on the pro-independence side.
Yep, he actually was the very person who wrote the question in that meeting because he was the one taking minutes.
That was used in the referendum in 1995. Yes. And he was quite young at the time too, wasn't he? Like in his 20s,
early 20s.
Yeah, he was. So he was basically like actually, I guess a little bit younger than Connor.
He was younger than me. Yeah.
And so prominent figure within the pro-independence movement in Quebec that narrowly failed in the 1995 referendum, but he ended up moving to. This is the funny thing. he ended up moving to the Western provinces. And if I recall, you said that he now lives in Alberta, right? And he basically now views himself as an Albertan.
Yeah.
And so he went from being, you know, a Quebecois nationalist to now, in a way, almost being an Albertan nationalist. Well, he wrote this paper and he's talking about his experiences from working in Quebec politics and all the stuff that they were doing both in the lead up to the independence referendum, but also in the aftermath of that, and how Quebec really just strong-armed their way into almost acting like a state within a state.
Yeah.
Within Canada, where they have so many, legal mechanisms to kind of protect their own autonomy. And he's pointing out that almost all of those things that Quebec did, Alberta has access to every single one of those things. And he goes through this paper. He talks about, again, the political background, the history of Quebec, and then he relates it to what's happened in Alberta. And later on in the paper, he starts getting to, like, here's some specific examples of, like, Alberta doesn't really have fair federal representation in terms of, like, a percentage of its population. They're getting screwed when it obviously comes to the equalization stuff. But then later on, he then look, Alberta's paying out far more.
102,000 per household?
Yeah.
Yes.
And I mean, look at what the Maritimes are receiving, right? They're the ones that are benefiting from this. And Quebec's kind of in the middle where they do benefit, but not as much as some of the other maritime provinces.
Yeah.
And anyway, he keeps going on in the rest of the paper, and then he starts talking about potential solutions. And there's going to be stuff in here that Nick or myself would disagree with, because some of it involves, you might want to create a state corporation that will then do X, Y, or Z. Like, one of the ideas that he throws out
the solution is uniquely how to solve the problem within the Canadian political system right now, not necessarily let's change to a republic or something like that.
Yeah. So basically what he's advocating for in this paper is saying, here's a lot of the things that Quebec did in order to protect itself, to be able to govern itself, to be able to maintain a certain degree of autonomy. And again, when you learn about the different restrictions that Quebec puts on the rest of Canada.
They put restrictions on who can move in.
Yes. I mean, it's incredible. Like, I had no idea, like, I had no conception of how much control Quebec really has and how much concessions they get from the Canadian government to just be there. And so when Mr. Trudeau lays this out, like, to me,
the good Trudeau,
the good Trudeau, not the bad Trudeau. When he lays this out, this to me seems like it makes a lot more sense. Now here's my question though: how many people are aware of this approach? Like, as you look at this movement in Alberta, that definitely wants some kind of significant change from the status quo. How many people are aware of this approach versus the let's just separate approach?
This is a literal handful of people that know that this is an option.
Why?
Because there has been a huge animosity stirred up between Alberta and Quebec. Like, Albertans typically do not like Quebecers.
Yeah.
And Quebecers do not like Alberta, because for the longest time, the narrative that was fed by most media, by the government, by just even just people's experiences, was that we hate each other, we're at odds, and for example, Alberta views Quebec as a leech, and Quebec views Alberta as, by and large, as just those rednecks over there.
Yeah, redneck hicks with about a bunch of oil.
Yeah. And
so this is one of those politics makes for interesting bedfellow scenarios, right? Where it's like, you do have two very different cultures, very different economies, different languages. Like, I mean, it's different.
Different histories, everything.
And for all intents and purposes, not a ton in common.
No.
This would be a little bit like, I don't know, like Texas and Vermont, right? Like, or Texas and Massachusetts. It's like, but the differences are even more stark.
Oh yeah.
Even more stark. So imagine Texas and California.
Except California speaks Spanish.
Yeah.
Even more than they currently do.
Yeah. Okay, so, but having said that, Quebec had a lot of problems with the Canadian government and being ruled in a way that they thought didn't protect their autonomy, their culture, their everything else.
For the longest time, it genuinely didn't. They were referred to in the 20th century as the Negroes of the North, the white Negroes. That was a literal term, because that's how they were treated within Quebec. There There were so many restrictions placed on them, and
so when they say that, they're like comparing it almost to like Jim Crow laws. And
is that what they were getting at? Like
yes.
the comparison to the South,
and that's part of why Quebec responded so strongly in the 20th century and like created essentially their socialist state within a state, is because they're like, hey, we have to defend ourselves. We have to protect ourselves. They got a mechanism to do it, and they're like, okay, screw everybody else. We're going to make sure that we don't die and we're not taken advantage of again the same way we've been taken advantage of for centuries.
So they
were also incredibly poor in the turn of this century. I think that's where that derogatory nickname came from, because
French ethnicity compared to like more like English or Anglo. But then the other component here that I think is, because I think if I remember correctly, part of the reason why that moniker was used is because what they were essentially comparing is the way that Black Americans were being treated in certain areas of the United States, especially under things like Jim Crow laws, where it was there were legal restrictions. I mean, some of it's segregation laws, but a lot of it too were not as blatant. They were not as obvious if you read the text on what the law was getting at. Mm-hmm. But the laws in many cases under Jim Crow were specifically designed to put Black Americans at a competitive, legal, economic disadvantage. I feel like that's what the people in Quebec thought the same thing about Canadian laws that were on the book, federal laws that were put on the book, that put them at the same sort of legal, economic, social disadvantage. Is that fair?
And it is, and it's also an objective fact.
Okay, so it's true. It's not like they're complaining about nothing.
I was going to bring up just a second ago that on the economic front, you know, I'm going back to like thinking of like Thomas Sowell when he was growing up in North Carolina in like the 30s. Like when you think about the economic side of this, Quebec in the about turn of the century, I believe I read from this paper that Mr. Trudeau wrote, apparently the good Trudeau, was that about 5% of the population in Quebec owned 99% of the wealth, and that 5% were English.
Yeah.
They weren't French Canadians. They were English migrants that moved to Montreal and kind of owned all the businesses in the province. And so the Quebecois, like the actual native French population there, were just incredible. This is again like 1900s, right? Yeah. They were incredibly impoverished compared to the rest of the country. Mm-hmm. And on a legal side, they were heavily discriminated against because of their different cultural identity. But also economically, they were just very poor, but they had numbers. And so what happened over time is that they organized, and that's actually in many respects, like Connor said, where they got a bit of that socialist tradition from, because they viewed it as a group identity type thing in order to preserve their cultural identity. Yeah. But what's interesting about this is Alberta has a much more, individualist streak in it, right? It's a much more conservative in the modern sense type of reputation. Whereas in Quebec, it's arguably more collectivistic. But Trudeau's argument here, and I have to keep stressing Ben Trudeau's argument here in this paper, is that if you get beyond the historical grievances that existed in the last, 50 years between the Western provinces and Quebec, he's arguing that in many respects, they're actually natural allies and they don't realize it.
Well, I would say that they're natural allies in the sense, not because they want to live in the same sort of place, but because they don't want to be governed by what they perceive to be a distant government that does not have their best interests in place. And regardless of whether or not you want to go in a more socialist direction or you want to go in more a free market or conservative direction, neither one of those provinces want to live with a government that they don't think is actually serving their interests.
Correct.
And the difference is Quebec had to fight this battle. And again, the unique part about Quebec too is we have to remember that if you look at the history of Canada was settled in large part, when we talk about the West, in large part by the British Empire and the French. And the French controlled significant portions of Canada prior to the French and Indian War. Yeah. Where all of it became a Canadian, a British
possession.
Possession, yeah.
The Quebec Act.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's one of the things that triggered the American Revolution.
Yes, it was.
Yeah. So it's interesting that there's a complex history there in context which leads up to this, and why you can see where the distrust might have been and why the legal system might have set up in such a way that did genuine harm to the people of Quebec. So they organized and they were able to get sufficient concessions to remain a part of Canada, but still operate far more independently than any other province. So I guess what you're saying is part of what this is again, not for similar in states, but for a shared enemy.
Correct.
They can learn from one another in a way that they don't seem willing to do right now because there is that overall animosity.
And also just it's not known in Alberta what Quebec has gone through and why they do what they do.
Mm-hmm.
People just see the fruit of it and they don't understand the why.
So here's another thing I wanted to ask about. Okay, so they see the fruit of it. They don't. Do you think that there's going to be more of a push to understand this as an option? Or do you think it's going to be something where the separatist component or the separatist, I don't know if we want to say movement or whatnot, the movement to separate. Because you say separatist movement, and a lot of times that has negative connotations. I don't mean it that way. I just mean there is already an established movement right now, a referendum going forward. They've already put the proper things in place politically to be able to get that vote.
Yeah.
Do you think this is something where the vote happens and it fails, or the vote happens and it runs into so many roadblocks over the next year or two that people realize that, oh yeah, this was fake. This was fake. We were never going to be able to leave. Do you think then people start looking for answers somewhere else, or do you think this has to happen first?
I believe it's better if this happens first, because if you go down the potential rabbit hole of could we leave, that's going to take that'll take not only investment of time and capital, but also significant emotional investment.
Yeah.
And if you run after 5 years and find out, oh, we can't do it, you don't necessarily have the heart to go, oh, maybe there was a path.
Yeah.
You're like, no, I've got a family to raise now.
I think that's right.
Get life done.
People will expend energy up to so much, but when they get beat, they're like, screw it. It is what it is. Well, let me ask you, because Erica asked this question. Erica Ray in the audience asked, question, is Alberta, if Alberta exerted control in the areas they legally can, would it cause a big enough pain that other provinces might want to let them go?
It could. If Alberta did everything to the T that Quebec does, it would challenge the Canadian system because it wasn't set up. It wasn't set up for that.
So, because here's the part that I find interesting. In the United States, we have differentiation between federal and state laws. But the things that are considered the province of the federal government have to do with things like freedom of movement. One state cannot restrict the freedom of movement into its state by an American citizen, unless they've actually broken a law, right? They've violated a crime. But there's free immigration and movement within the United States. There's also free trade within the United States. Yeah. Like one state cannot levy tariffs against another state. You can't do that. It's part of the Interstate Commerce Clause. So part of what they were doing was establishing these things in order to ensure a kind of national framework, but allow those decisions which we might consider to be more appropriate for a particular region to reside within the state, which I think overall makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
But you're saying that the Canadian government was not structured that way, as Quebec has obviously proven. And so now you do start to wonder what makes you a part of a larger nation if you can control your own immigration. So Quebec,
like for even for example, in Canada, there isn't free trade between provinces. It's easier for every single province and territory in Canada to trade directly with the United States than it is to trade with each other.
Really?
Really.
Okay, so
this is starting to change because of the tariff situation that we've got now.
Yeah, but it's still a mess.
But again, those tariffs impact Canada universally. You see what I'm saying? Like, I don't know how much the tariffs would actually change it with respect to trade with the United States versus trade between each other, because part of what it is when the United States essentially establishes a trade deal, it's for all of the United States.
Yeah,
you're saying that when Canada establishes a trade deal, that might have very, very different implications by province.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's go through the list real quick of maybe some of the bigger things that Alberta could do today if they chose this path. So right now, Alberta has no restrictions on who comes in and lives in Alberta. Correct. As long as you're a Canadian citizen.
As long as you're not even a Canadian citizen. As long as you have a valid visa, you can come and live there.
Okay. But tomorrow, Alberta, with the premier and with the votes in their, I'm assuming provincial parliament.
They control the provincial legislature.
Provincial legislature.
And they have I believe they have a supermajority.
Okay. So arguably the votes are there to where if they wanted to tomorrow or whenever the next legislative session is, right, they could come in and say, okay, if you want to move into Canada now, it's not simply as much as having a visa or a Canadian, citizenship.
Yeah.
You now they could set up different criteria. They could just say no. Like what?
So they have full powers to say, okay, they could say, we're not taking it. For example, they could say, we're not taking anybody from United Kingdom or Saudi Arabia or America.
So they could say that.
They can say that.
And there's nothing in the Canadian Constitution or the provincial constitution that would prevent them from.
Correct. Canada was set up so that provinces actually have a great deal of autonomy, but majority of them just haven't exercised that autonomy because they haven't needed to.
Does Ottawa punish them if they try to do it? I mean, they didn't.
I mean, they'll file a lawsuit, but for example, with Quebec, a lot of stuff that Quebec does, they just go ahead and do it. And they let the federal government file a lawsuit if they file a lawsuit.
Got it.
Whereas for example, in Alberta will try to convince the federal government to do something and sue them instead if federal government is just ignoring constitutional law.
Got it.
So whereas Quebec is proactive, Alberta is reactive.
Got it. Okay, so tomorrow they could decide, hey, if they wanted to, they could effectively shut down their borders with respect to people. I imagine they couldn't shut down like their freeways. You could still enter Alberta, but you couldn't like live in Alberta.
Well, if they really wanted to, they could. But what they would have to do is they would have to get rid of the RCMP contracts and fully fund and hire for their provincial police force, just like Quebec has done. Because in Quebec, the RCMP has almost zero authority for doing policing duties. They are only a federal police force. They do not actually do any of the policing.
Yeah.
Aside from the stuff that they're mandated to do.
Okay. So they could essentially, if they wanted to spend the money, that's another part. This is a big part of this, right? If they wanted to spend the money, what they could say is, okay, no more living it. We will. You now have to go through a process to literally immigrate to Alberta and live here. It's no longer just whatever. If you got a visa or Canadian citizenship, they could also say RCMP. We no longer want you enforcing. I mean, obviously they have a Calgary Police Department. They have an Edmonton Police Department, but the larger.
They also have a Sheriff's Department and a couple other things.
Okay. Yeah. But like not every, do you have counties?
It's counties, but counties, they look for, who's offering policing contract services. RCMP is usually the easiest to go to because usually they're the cheapest because they can get subsidized.
Yeah.
But like if we wanted to, we could just go, okay, well, we'll just make it that's the Alberta Police Force, for example, that working title.
Yeah.
We'll just subsidize them so they're the best option for every one of our counties to choose.
So the way the feds do it, the way the feds get you to pick the RCMP is I take your money.
Yes.
And now I'm going to provide you this police force. If you don't want the police force, you don't got to take it, but I'm still taking your money for the police force.
Exactly.
And so it seems like fiscally irresponsible to do that. But if you wanted to reinsert dominance over your own law enforcement structure, that is perfectly open to Alberta to do. They would just have to finance it themselves. Okay. Correct. So they could establish that. I imagine that would have a significant impact. There's a reason why Quebec did it. Trade deals. What sort of trade deals could Alberta strike with foreign countries if they chose to do so? Or would they still have to go through the federal government?
That one I'm hazier on. Okay. I don't have as much. Yeah, I can't unfortunately help as that one because I do have some information in my head, but I can't remember if it's accurate or not.
Okay. All right. So let's just assume for a second that, let's go to something we talked about earlier. One of the things that Quebec does with their hydroelectricity is they have set up a legal structure which essentially allows them to have far greater control, not only over the way it's run, but also how tax revenue can be collected from it.
Correct.
So they end up controlling a lot more of it and sending a whole lot less to Ottawa as a result.
Correct.
And what you're saying is that there's no reason why Alberta couldn't do the same thing with, like, say, the oil and mineral industries.
Correct.
But the question would be, and this is, I think, what Christian was getting to as well, do you set it up under private ownership? Is there some sort of like government stake in that ownership?
You would set it up as private corporation where the one shareholder is the government of Alberta.
Okay. And what that would do is, and then what they could do is, one, that would change the dynamic of the way it's taxed in Ottawa.
Yes.
And then when it sells into international markets, depending on what they get back, depending on how they tax. So if they just, again, if Alberta sells its oil to the United States and gets US dollars in return, Canada taxes. But if they were to get something else,
Like
it does.
bitumen.
Explain what you mean by that.
So bitumen is basically it's unprocessed oil. So Alberta sends oil down through the pipelines at a massively discounted rate because you're our only customer.
Yeah.
And it's great for you guys because that makes up cheap oil on the continent. But we can, instead of asking for US dollars in return for a barrel of oil, we could say, hey, could you actually give us a type of either unrefined or lightly refined crude?
Yeah.
And just pipe it back up to us instead.
So, okay, but the benefit to Albertans would be when you're selling oil in Alberta,
yes,
right? You're getting cash payments for it,
yeah,
right? Which you can then use on other things. And what you could do to offset some of the tax collected by Ottawa is you could say, hey, some of this oil we're selling you, we're getting back in US dollars, but some of it we would just like back in exchange for another commodity.
Yeah.
And that commodity wouldn't get taxed. And so your overall, your bottom line would be much better.
That would be mutually beneficial for
Yeah.
us too, because one of the things that I've brought up repeatedly on this podcast is the problems that come about from the dollar status as the global reserve currency.
Yeah.
In a way, I think it would actually be beneficial for us as Americans if dollars were used less in international trade instead of more.
It's an advanced form of barter.
yes.
Yeah. And so, like, if we had resources that Alberta wants and they have resources that we want, and we can simply swap those resources rather than swap currency. Well, first off, you're avoiding the problem of, using an inflationary fiat currency.
Yeah.
But the second one is that you're also, in a way, avoiding the negative implications of the Triffin dilemma, which is something that we're seriously grappling with here in the United States.
So engaging in that kind of trade with Canada, like you said, would be mutually beneficial for the United States because, one, we continue to get cheaper oil, but two, we could actually exchange a commodity as opposed to our currency, which is already dealing with inflationary problems. All right, so Connor, tell me the other thing about this idea of the Compact of Free Association. Is this something that Alberta needs to separate to achieve, or is it something they could actually do within the current legal framework?
So from my understanding, this is something where, because Trump's been putting pressure on Canada since he's been in office for the second term consistently, and just poking, like at first he's like, we'll annex Canada. And now it's now it's 35% on tariffs. But I know for a lot of folks, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense, but at least for me, what I understand it as, it's okay. From my point of view, it looks like Trump's wanting to poke around at Canada, see where he can find a chink in the armor and strike a deal somehow. Mm-hmm. One way he could do that is by driving a wedge essentially between Alberta and Canada. And that wedge could be offering a COFA, so Compact of a Free Association arrangement to Alberta, the same way it was sent to like Marshall Islands and those places in the Pacific. Because for a COFA, that is something the executive branch can negotiate. They don't need anybody else's input. They can negotiate it, and once it is negotiated, usually within a 1 to 3 year process, as was the case with the Marshall Islands, then the only thing they need to do is just go to Congress and have them approve it. And because it's not an actual treaty, you don't need a supermajority. You just need a majority in each house, +1. Huh. So that is a genuine tool. If Trump wanted to use that to put pressure on either Mark Carney to strike a better deal, he's like, well, we could just take Alberta from you unless you like give us a better deal over here. Yeah. And then he can also talk to Alberta at the same time, pit Alberta and Canada against each other and get the best deal for America. Because this is something
because Alberta could do this while remaining a part of Canada.
I don't quite know the details on how it works.
No, the answer to that one would be no, because what we have right now with the Compact of Free Association is countries like Micronesia, Northern Mariana Islands. Like these are former American not even really colonies, because they're
possessions.
just small islands in the Pacific that we left usually in the late 20th century, but they're in this weird spot where
they're not a U.S. territory.
They're not a U.S. territory, and they have a seat in the UN.
Status.
But we have very strong agreements with them where it's like we conduct their defense for them. We de facto conduct their foreign policy for them. We provide social services for them, and we have like free trade agreements and stuff like that. A lot of times, these Compact of Free Associations are set up because the independent territory is really not capable of being a fully sovereign state because it's so small or isolated, or it doesn't really have any sort of domestic industry or economy of its own. But it's so remote from the United States that
they're almost like a vassal.
They're basically like a vassal state. It's almost like the old, when you think of the British Empire, a lot of people think of just pure colonization, like when the British colonized us. But the British Empire was a lot more complex than that. They had various different levels of integration into the United Kingdom itself, right? The furthest most example is Wales is just straight up part of the United Kingdom to this very day, right? Whereas if you go back to the Middle Ages, it was an independent kingdom. Well, a more moderate example of that is what happened to, say, Botswana, which it was a British protectorate, but it basically governed itself entirely, like its own. The British Empire conducted its foreign policy when the British Empire had control over a quarter of the world, but Botswana effectively just ran itself as a quasi-independent state within the British Empire until finally decolonization came around.
Yeah, and they achieved full independence. Okay, so all right. I think we've done a good job of looking at this from various perspectives and options that could be achieved. Next, I kind of want to jump into, okay, what do we think should happen? Look, I don't think Trump was ever serious about
51st state, right?
I don't think Trump was ever serious about Canada being the 51st state. I think that I think this has always been about leveraging American economic power and the power of us being the reserve currency in order to get better trade deals with a number of people, and Canada is one of our most important trading partners. However, I do think he also witnesses that there is a significant problem in Canada right now between its western provinces, southwestern provinces, I guess. Saskatchewan, Alberta, and British Columbia.
They're considered western provinces because up north they're territories. They're not provinces.
So significant issues there, which can be leveraged. And when you look at the sort of trade that we want to do with Canada, like Alberta is one of the primary, when we talk about Canada being one of our most important trading partners, Alberta has a lot to do with that.
Yeah. You have vested strategic interest in making sure that you have an oil supply for the continental United States.
Yeah. And so I do think Trump is applying pressure however he can, and I think for the longest time this would have been considered kind of unthinkable that the United States would apply this kind of pressure to go so far as to actually create significant political division that could lead to the separation of a country that's considered an ally.
Yep.
So let's just agree that's kind of unprecedented for a U.S. president to kind of apply that kind of pressure in the way that he's doing it right now. By the same token, I don't think your current government is helping itself much with respect to this. This is one of these things where you saw Trudeau and now you've seen Carney. There's always, you can talk a good game.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, again, a combination of us being the world's largest economy, the largest consumer economy, plus the world's reserve currency. There's not, like, Canada does not hold a lot of cards right now.
And Canada is not doing itself any favors. Like King Charles of Great Britain came over, I think close to 2 months ago now, a month and a half, and argued for Canada to essentially have more ties with Europe and less with America. I'm very much generalizing here, and then the Liberal government has also been looking to court Europe or even court Asia and have less to do with America, which strategically Canada cannot back that up. Their military only has around 70,000 personnel total, and their equipment is decrepit. They have like 2 weeks of ammunition max.
Well, and the the big problem too is like I doubt the United States is going to invade Canada anytime soon.
No.
But when you also look at what does closer ties with Europe mean? So you want closer ties with a continent that hasn't experienced any significant economic growth for what now, Christian? About 2 decades?
Since the 2008 crash.
Yeah. So since 2008, Europe has experienced no significant economic advancement. Now there are various countries that have done better than other ones, but when we look at the EU as a whole, they're not in great shape right now. They got their own energy crisis issues. They've got, and a lot of it is self-imposed. The regulatory environment in Europe is horrible.
Yes.
And here's my question for Canada. If German companies have a hard time setting up companies in Germany, how exactly is Canada going to be able to weather that storm, right? Like if domestic companies in Europe have a hard time operating, unless you're really, really in tight with the government, what incentive structure is there for those governments on any real level to reach out and make overtures to Canada to make it more profitable for Canadians to do business with Europe after they cross an entire ocean, right?
Yeah.
As opposed to the United States where you just walk across the border. Like there's the amount of things that the EU would have to do, right? And look, King Charles is not exactly bright, right? But the amount of things that Europe would have to do in order to incentivize Canada away to investing in far greater trade with Europe than with the United States doesn't make sense.
No.
It doesn't make sense. I'm not saying that, look, Canada should pursue its interests.
Yes.
But there's just no real world where doing business with Europe is more profitable to Canada than doing business with the United States. And, again, it's okay. So we realize that, again, this is not a question of Canada becoming a part of the United States. I don't think it's even a question necessarily of Alberta becoming part of the United States, because again, you not only have to go through nearly insurmountable legal hurdles within the Canadian system, but then you would have to go through significant hurdles within the U.S. system. And as much as Trump or a lot of people in the U.S. might say, oh, we love Alberta. Let's say that's actually it. We love Alberta. It would be great. You guys would fit right in. You're going to have every blue state is going to oppose the inclusion of Alberta into the United States.
Yeah.
Every blue state's going to oppose it, because to actually become a state means the granting of citizenship. It means you get 2 senators. It means you completely, people forget that one of the main reasons why slavery persisted in the United States for so long was not just for the economic components of it and things of that nature, but we were largely broken down into free states and slave states.
Yeah.
And there was a whole host of other things that came with controlling the Senate. And as new states were incorporated, new senators were incorporated, and that influenced a lot of things beyond just kind of the obvious issues.
Yeah.
And it would be the same thing with adding a 51st state. So it's again, so let's just put that aside and say, I think we all agree at this table that the probability of Alberta being able to separate from Canada successfully and then being able to become part of the United States successfully is probably the least likely
100%
outcome
likely
of what we've discussed.
Especially because
right now it is.
And right now it wouldn't even be in Alberta's interest, because it would mean they would have to surrender mineral rights, which right now Alberta actually owns their own mineral rights.
Okay.
In the U.S., you don't. That's a federal resource.
Okay. So that's that. We analyze that's probably not going to happen. Let's go with the other one too, because I know I'm kind of pushing this in a particular direction, but because I think it's most likely. What do you think the probability is of just the status quo gets maintained and nothing really changes and we just get more? I mean, voters are upset, politicians complain, but ultimately the inertia is just, it is what it is. And this,
normally I would say that's most likely. And the reason why I'm skeptical about that, even though I would still rate it at least 40%, is because Mark Carney, he is a World Economic Forum hack. He's done a lot of stuff with the Bank of England that he's promoting, like things like DEI, ESG, green energy, like getting rid of all
at the same time the United States is pushing back on immigration,
he's
DEI,
doubling down.
Okay, he is like the polar opposite of Trump when it comes to okay.
He is what if Trudeau was essentially Trudeau is like a WEF wannabe.
Yeah.
He doesn't actually he's not intellectually rigorous on it. He doesn't maybe he admires a lot of the guys, but he's not able to.
He's socialist Ken doll.
Yes.
Okay.
Whereas Mark Carney actually understands how it works.
Yeah.
He's invested in the system. He's written as much in his book Values.
Yeah.
And he very much wants to drive Canada in the direction that the World Economic Forum has been pushing for years.
Okay, so with that, now we find ourselves in a situation where there was no real correction of any of the underlying conditions. In fact, it's theoretically getting much worse under Carney. So now we have this situation where maybe we call the two extreme sides of this. One extreme being
nothing.
Alberta leaves and becomes part of the United States. The other extreme being nothing really changes because nothing ever changes.
Yeah.
That leaves us with the other two options, which is that we've discussed, which is Alberta goes through the process of having this referendum and beginning this process one way or another, or they start doing what Ben Trudeau has suggested, which is this idea of, no, what you need to do is take a page out of the book of what Quebec did, because the Canadian Constitution allows you to operate so much more autonomously than you currently are. Those two options, what do we think is most likely today?
I would say if it was not advertised that there was an option for Alberta to just behave like Quebec, and that it was legal and you don't need to go through court or anything to do it, I would say it'd be more likely that the referendum thing happens and then nothing changes. But this is what Ben Trudeau's paper is. There's a genuine, if it is marketed properly, if Albertans are made aware of it, if this is shown that, hey, this is an actual pathway to stand up for yourself and actually be a Canadian. You don't have to go try to be an Albertan or be an American. It's like, no. You can assert your Canadian rights, and you can tell the federal government you could just say, thanks, but no thanks. We're going to do our own thing over here. And just do that.
Okay. So that leads me to a question of culture.
Yeah.
Because if you were to look at the United States prior to the Civil War, people primarily identified with their state.
Yes.
And then the United States. And most people don't understand that when you look at the Army of the Potomac, those were not federal forces. Those were state militias, right? The vast majority of the fighting that took place in the Civil War was not between the official Confederate Army and the official United States Army in the sense that we think of it today. It was fought between state militias. That's why it wasn't the 82nd Airborne versus the 7th infantry, or it was the 7th Virginia Infantry or 2nd Alabama Cavalry against the 20th Maine or the 90th Pennsylvania, right? But after the Civil War, you started to see a lot more of a national identity as opposed to a state identity.
Yes.
It was kind of a natural consequence of what happened. The line is that before the Civil War, it was the United States are. After the Civil War, it was the United States is.
Yes.
Here's my question in Canada. When you look at an Albertan, right? Let's even say an Albertan that is frustrated
and conservative, all the
cabs. So I'm not talking about the liberal people that happen to live in Alberta, right? I'm talking about the people that do they see themselves as Albertan and Canadian, or Canadian and they live in Alberta?
The supermajority view themselves as Canadian living in Alberta.
Okay.
Which is why that paper is titled "How to Put." Can you bring it back?
How to cite, be a true Canadian.
How to be a true Canadian, because Ben is aware that he's aware of his demographics and what they believe, and it's like, okay, well, if the majority of Albertans view themselves as Canada, then we need to pitch this as well, because it's also true. Then, okay, if you're a Canadian, you need to actually start acting like a true Canadian and live out the rights and freedoms you actually do have.
Okay. So this is what's interesting to me right now, is if there does seem to be a significant movement and the government of Alberta has made certain steps in order to push along this referendum vote. Again, we discussed that there could be ulterior motives.
Yeah.
It could be that she's pushing the vote because she knows it will fail under this threshold.
Yeah.
And then we can get beyond that and now worry about like, what do we do next, right? Like that's one. And because Alberta, unlike Quebec, has appealed to the federal government and then sued him as opposed to just doing what they want and letting the feds sue them, you can tell that there's this, there's a hesitation to take it too far. Do you think if more Albertans knew about this as an option, all the other stuff would like that? It would basically suck all the air out of the room and go into, nope, we're going to remain Canada. We're going to remain this, but this is what we expect out of our provincial legislature. Do you think this would be the far more popular approach with Albertans if they were more aware of it?
Absolutely, without a doubt.
Really? So how come it isn't?
'Cause nobody knows about this stuff.
But why? See, that's my thing, right? Like, because the other thing we've learned in politics in the United States is that there are times where a certain idea takes on a life of its own.
Yeah.
And if you're not loyal to that idea or to that movement or whatever it is, you're a traitor, right? It's like, we're not doing anything else. We're staying focused here. Don't give us enough. And I get it.
Yeah.
I get it, because a lot of times there's always this push to kind of like divide and conquer. And so now you have a bunch of conservative groups fighting with one another to be the predominant one. And so when one gets enough momentum to be the main effort, to be the focus, it gets to be the main effort. It will run its course. Is that what's going on in Alberta right now with this idea of the referendum to separate?
Yeah, it's on a knife's edge of that being the idea. It is not the idea yet. And
so what would it take? What would it take for something like this? Would it take prominent elected officials within Alberta to basically say, hey, this is the option I think we should go with? Like, what would it, because who's advocating for this right now?
Right now, Ben Trudeau and I think some of the folks he knows. But this is a thing this is new. This is, like, you see the draft. This is his second draft from June. This isn't, what it would take for this option to get known would be basically a targeted marketing campaign, information meetings. You're probably looking at about right now we are at about 2.5 years till the next Alberta provincial election.
Okay. So is it every 4 years then?
It's about that.
Okay.
What you would need is you need a team of people going around the province that are funded, that are doing information meetings, doing town halls, going around and just actually going into every part of the province, rural and urban, and sharing, hey, this is a genuine option. This is actually a stronger option than leaving Canada, and it's also one that's in line with your interests, because most Albertans want to just actually do enjoy being Canadian and don't necessarily want to leave the family of Canada. So this, if it was funded properly and done legally and ethically, which it can be done, because like laws are a little different in Canada for doing stuff that's politically oriented, so funding is way stricter than it is in America.
Are there any prominent politicians in Alberta that have offered up something like this as an alternative or an approach?
To my knowledge, no.
Although I know that some of the things that Danielle Smith has done, during her tenure as premier has been to kind of tee up Alberta's ability to kind of operate as a semi-autonomous state. Like, I know that you've mentioned things like the pension system. There's there have been like pieces of legislation, like there's been a whole package of branded sovereignty style legislation that
there has, but it's been fluff and no meat. Like there hasn't been anything that's come of it. It's been great talking points, but Alberta has she has a supermajority. She can put this into law at their next session if she actually wanted to. Like, we could withdraw from the Canadian pension plan. Like, it's not a thing where they need permission from anybody. They just need to go do it, and they don't want to go do it because that shakes the boat.
So it's the typical problem that all politicians have, which is inertia is the most powerful force in politics, right? Politicians do not like angry voters, and how do you get angry voters? You do something.
Yeah.
And so the temptation is to always do nothing. This is where you get
or at least look like you're doing something, but then actually not do anything. So that way you get the best of both worlds. You actually look like you're achieving things, and you're just getting pushed back and you're the victim, but you're actually fighting. Or which then looks good to your base, or then you just silently kill things.
Well, but to me, I have this feeling that after 10 years of Trudeau's government, that by every metric you can possibly look at, ended in disaster. And now they've got a new face in there that, you and I were talking about this. There's this perception that, oh, well, we can just blame everything on Trudeau. It's different now. It's the same government, same party, but, we've got a new guy in charge, and so we get a pass on the last 10 years.
Yeah.
And the voters have, in many respects, tragically rewarded that mindset. Yeah. When you look at the opinion, what's crazy is when you look at the opinion polling in Canada right now, the Liberals have a 10-point, in some cases more than 10-point lead over the Conservatives since the last election that was held in February.
Yeah.
They barely won that election against the Conservatives with Pierre by about 2 points. They're now polling at about, again, a 10 to 11 point lead. So they've actually grown their polling advantage in the last, basically 6 months. That's insane when you consider everything that we talked about at the beginning of this podcast of how the Liberal government has just basically destroyed this country over the last 10 years. The voters are rewarding them for that. But obviously, it's not the voters in Alberta that are rewarding them for that. In fact, actually, when you look at the opinion polling for the provincial legislature in Alberta, their equivalent of the Conservative Party at the provincial level, Danielle Smith's party, and it's funny that their main opposition are not the Liberals, it's the NDP of their main opposition. Really, well, they've grown their polling advantage since the election,
that's what
which naturally implies
we're seeing that division, right? Yeah. It's like Canada... the Liberal government is polling better. They're basically solidifying their base. They're solidifying the areas that they already control, but they're actually getting less popular in the areas that they don't. So it's not as if they got a broad consensus. It's the people that really hate Trump.
Yes.
There's
a lot of people who really hate Trump in Canada.
Like the Liberal government. And the people that are not either, and it doesn't mean they're pro-Trump, it just means they don't like the way that they're being governed. They're also it's becoming more divisive. Yeah. We talked about this in the United States. You're seeing the exact same phenomenon. For a long time, what you saw is if you were liberal, you voted liberal. If you were, and let me caveat that.
Sure.
If you had liberal values, you voted liberal. Your voting patterns reflected what your stated values were. If you had conservative values, you usually voted Republican or conservative.
But sometimes you might still vote for the Liberals without even realizing
You might vote for the Liberals without realizing. You might vote for a local Democrat candidate. You might vote for because Bob or whatever it was. It wasn't as ideologically driven in the sense that it's like, no, I'm conservative values. I vote for these politicians. You had a lot more of, oh, well, I know that person, or this person sounds good, or I'm not too sure about that guy. You did not have the same thing on the left in the United States. You now have it. You now have it to where if you identify with conservative values, you are far more likely to be voting that way. Yeah. And that seems to make sense, but it wasn't the dynamic. And I think it was because a lot of conservatives weren't as obsessed with politics. Politics was not the way that they got their identity. It's not the way they solved problems. They had a business to run, a family to raise, whatever else it was, and that's how they focused. It sounds like you're starting to see the same thing in Canada now, where there's a closer tie between stated values and voting patterns.
Yes.
And it also sounds like in the United States, a lot of our shift is urban versus rural. Mm-hmm. And I imagine that's also reflected in Canada. But there seems to be a growing region of the country which is very dissatisfied with Ottawa and the urban centers within those areas are not powerful enough to kind of shift that.
That's correct.
Okay. So last thing I want to ask here, and this goes into, kind of overall strategy, and then we got some questions in the from the audience I want to go to. Do you think that it may be, being that this seems to be an option that makes so much more sense? And again, I'm just saying this from the outside looking in.
Yeah.
It seems to make so much more sense. It seems to accomplish the goals that Alberta are upset about with the federal government. And it seems to be something that allows them to maintain their Canadian identity.
Yes.
That seems to me like, okay, then why does that approach not have the kind of advocacy that the approach to vote for separation does? And there's only two things I can make sense of it with it. One, the separation movement has just taken on a life of its own, and it has now come to represent the conservative position, much like Trump.
Yeah.
Trump got to a point where MAGA represents something that's kind of its own force, right? That's one thing, to where anybody that wants to offer an alternative to the separation is now seen as being weak or not as committed or something like that, and they don't want to be seen that way. That's one potential thing. Another potential thing is you have people that are pushing this movement because they know it won't succeed, and then once they kill it, they can do what they want to do, right? And then that third option is it's just a newer idea. It's just a newer idea. This other idea has been around a little bit longer, and this is a newer one with respect to Alberta.
Yeah.
Obviously, Quebec's already done it, but with respect to Alberta. Which one of those three do you think is the most likely living in Alberta? Is it this has become the symbol of the resistance to Ottawa, and it doesn't want to compete with anyone, right? That's more of a grassroots approach. Political powers that be recognize that it has power and is essentially setting up for failure so they can move on from it. Or this is just a question of, this is a newer idea, and as it emerges, it's going to gain steam and it's going to gain political support, and it could supplant the first one.
I think it's genuinely number 3. I think it's just genuinely new, because all my life, I've never heard anybody talk about this before. I didn't know about this until recently. This is the thing that's like, oh, this is a genuine option. It's taking the facts that were there and just interpreting them in a way where I can actually understand what's going on, how the Canadian system works, and how, for example, me as an Albertan can actually participate in that. It's like, you know what? I'd actually like that.
Yeah. Okay, let's take some questions from the audience. Question: can the provinces make economic pacts like EU or BRICS, where the Western provinces could protect themselves? That's interesting. So could, for instance, Alberta, Saskatchewan, and British Columbia say, you know what? We're going to create a free trade zone just for us?
I mean, I don't know too much about Canadian economics in that respect.
Yeah.
But given that provinces are actually able to conduct that sort of,
because
I would assume so. I'm not specifically knowledgeable in that area.
Because when Quebec did this, they again, what you were saying, that Quebec can actually set up separate trade, or it's not that they can set up separate international trade deals. They can just kind of they can set up stuff for Quebec.
Yes.
And they have asserted themselves into international trade deals where Canada's they've inserted where they get a seat at the table, and they essentially kind of get to approve it.
Yes.
So theoretically, the question would be: is there anything that you know of in the Canadian Constitution that would prevent provinces? Because if I have the ability to set my own internal policy, well, then theoretically, what's to say I can't set an internal policy which gives more favorable trading status to a neighboring province than it would be to a different province?
Like, theoretically,
it's possible.
Absolutely can do that. It's just a thing where it's rocking the boat.
Yeah.
So a lot of people just go, I like my cushy salaried job. I'd much rather just do smaller things and not maybe rock that boat.
Okay. Here's another one. Being that obviously, we see this with the BBC in the UK, and we also see it with the CBC in Canada, where you basically they like to pretend that it's not state-controlled media, but it effectively is.
I think it's 1.6 billion Canadian tax dollars go to CBC.
Yeah.
They are, which makes up, I believe it's over 90% of their operational budget. They are a state apparatus. They are not independent.
So to give you an idea, PBS got nowhere near that amount of government funding as a percentage of their overall revenue, and we shut them down because we got tired of them pushing propaganda.
Yeah.
So the CBC is obviously let's just say this: the incentive structure is not there to combat whatever the state wants, whatever Carney wants.
Yeah.
So we got another important question here, and that is, okay, then how does one educate Albertans on this? Or is it the sort of thing where all of your major news agencies line up to just trash it? So are you entirely relying essentially on social media, and based off of things that the Canadian government has proved they're willing to do with social media laws? Is this something where the government actively aligns to shut down any sort of effort, and can they effectively do so, or do you still have the means to be able to freely communicate in such a way to where you can make something like this popular?
We still have the means to freely communicate to make something like this possible, in part because this is Canada first. We're not actually pushing for like Alberta go become a state. It's like, and part of what actually just helps this position is like, if the federal government wanted to come down on it, it's like, okay, so you don't want us to put Canada first. What do you want us to do?
Mm-hmm. So it's harder for them. So essentially, it would be easier for them to shut down an independence approach as being, subversive. But when it comes to no, we just want to fully execute Canadian constitutional, authority. Yeah. Just like Quebec did. It's harder for them to combat that narrative as being subversive or insurrectionist or anything like that.
Or even just, those fringe minority people from out west, like they did for the trucker convoy. It's like, no. We actually just want to do what Quebec does. Yeah. That's it.
Yeah. By the same token, though, that could be, again, this is another thing that we've seen is if the media is fulfilling the interests of the state as opposed to the interests of its viewers or listeners. Yeah. Because the viewers and listeners aren't fitting the bill. I mean, they are through taxes, but it's not the same. Well, then it doesn't matter. Like the messaging of shutting down the insurrectionists is easier to sell, but that doesn't mean that what Carney's going to do. In fact, if Carney's smart, he's looking at this going, this is a far more dangerous option than separation. We can control separation and defeat it eventually in some stuff, but we can't. This one's harder for us to defeat, and so therefore they might marshal more resources in order to try to subvert it.
This would be one where you'd probably want to be more working with the local Alberta politicians and just making it in their interest to not marshal this. Because this is a thing where if there is not enough public awareness and if there's not enough awareness about this as an option and there isn't a genuine push that's financed to share, hey, this is an option, let's do it, this will die. Okay.
Another question here. With a culture of politeness and thoughtfulness and policy,
is what you mean.
Is Alberta or Western Canada actually willing to negotiate with President Trump, who switches his stance quite a bit? So we already know that there's a great deal of animosity toward President Trump in liberal circles in Canada, and even what we might even call moderate circles in Canada. Does the same animosity exist in conservative circles in Canada for what we might call cultural reasons? So, for instance, maybe if you took Trump out of the equation, you just looked at Trump's policies, maybe not including tariffs. If you just look at Trump's policies, conservatives in Canada might be, oh yeah, I really like that, but they don't like his delivery or method of argumentation or method of negotiation. So, is Trump popular within conservative circles in Canada, or is there still a little bit of animosity toward him?
I won't answer necessarily for Canada because I just don't know.
Yeah.
But for Alberta, it's hit and miss. I know for a fact, for when the inauguration took place, Danielle Smith went and attended the inauguration, and she's actually had several private meetings with Trump and his team. She went when the Prime Minister of Canada did not go to the inauguration.
Yeah.
So it's a thing, at least on a larger picture with Alberta, where we're at least willing to work with him. It's like, yeah, he's a human.
Okay.
It's worth noting, though, that Pierre Poilievre condemned Trump repeadedly on the campaign trail
that's probably
in the election this year.
Killed his election because
I don't buy that at all. I see so many what I mean by
conservatives
that is
Poilievre had his campaign set up to defeat Trudeau. Then when Carney came in, he did not pivot, and Carney smartly just did everything that Pierre was arguing for. It's like, okay. Now he took all the wind out of the conservative sails. Conservatives didn't pivot to tackle him, and Carney won.
Pierre ran out of messaging. He ran out of talking points in the last 2 months of that campaign because Carney replaced Trudeau, and then Carney did on a few things adopt the policies that Pierre was advocating for, not in the way that we would.
The liberals were able to demonstrate that they had heard the people. Trudeau was gone. They were going to relent on some of these issues,
and then it was a rally around the flag effect.
And then Trump galvanized when he said, just become the 51st state. Again, I don't know why Trump did that. I don't know if it was a moment of flippancy or if he was playing 5D chess. I know this.
I think that Trump just wanted to negotiate with the liberals more than with conservatives in Canada.
It may very well. I know this. There are things that people chalk up to Trump as just being, ignorant or flippant, which are actually, he's actually thought about it far more than they give him credit for.
Yeah.
There's other things that I think he says sometimes where I'm like, I don't know if that's 5D chess. So I'm not saying everything's 5D chess. I think more of it is than people give him credit for. We got a few more questions here I want to get through. Is there prevalent suspicion of voter fraud in Canada or actually specifically in Alberta? Because this is something that has really impacted the United States, where we had massive changes in voter laws during COVID. And you combine that with massive, unmitigated illegal immigration, there started to be real concerns about voter fraud. And in certain urban areas, there's no question that there has been significant voter fraud. Mm-hmm. And that can impact, when you look at we have an electoral college system. And so, enough voter fraud in a couple of key cities, and that swings an election. And so that's why it's become a far greater concern within the United States and the things that took place. Is there a similar concern in places like in Alberta, or is voter fraud not something that really is part of the issue in Canada?
It's not so much necessarily voter fraud, because it's not, at least to my knowledge, not as much of an issue in Canada. But what is a concern is just the unfettered amount of immigration in a lot of folks who are, at least ideologically, indebted to the current governing party, which is the Liberal Party.
Yeah.
Especially when you're importing literal millions of people a year to a country that has less than the population of California.
Yeah.
That makes a huge swing on the needle, especially when a lot of them will settle out east, where they have the majority of seats, the majority of Senate seats, majority of everything, because that's how Canada was designed, was for Eastern Canada to be the center of power. It's not that we feel that there's a voter fraud per se, but we feel very much that the game is rigged against Western Canada.
And by them increasing or increasingly immigrating populations that then show up and become part of the liberal voting bloc. Yeah. Well, and that's the other part too. It's always this idea of, it's, doctors and doctors and lawyers. And yeah, of course, there are people that immigrate from other countries that want to come to the West. Who do possess, good skills. Like I acknowledge that. I'm looking at a lot of the other people coming into the West right now, and they're going right onto welfare. And that creates, and look, people would ask, why would you ever want to do something like that? Well, if you're bringing in a large population, which immediately becomes dependent upon the state, the party that actually believes in the state managing these things benefits electorally. It's not that hard to figure out, right? There's a very, very logical straight line between why a politician would want to immigrate or would want mass immigration of people that are most likely to vote for them in the future. This shouldn't surprise anybody.
No.
Okay. Well, I think we got through. We got one more question here. Is would educating or telling people how they could change their country be seen as a hate crime from Canada's current prime minister?
Oh boy.
well, let's get into that for a second, because some of that might be kind of a flippant question. But another part too is, like, let's face it, we have seen this now both in the United States. We've definitely seen it in the UK.
Yeah.
We've seen it in Canada, where hate crime legislation or legislation with respect to we Americans, when we hear that other countries have freedom of speech, we think of it in terms of the freedom of speech we have in this country, which compared to the rest of the world, it's night and day. We have an entire amendment in our Constitution, which has traditionally been viewed as the courts as something of an absolute, right.
And it's unparalleled. No other country in the world has this.
No other country in the world has that. You will see there was this funny exchange between, Steven Crowder and somebody who was a teacher in Germany. And he's like, Germany does not have free speech. He goes, we have free speech. I live in Germany. I've taught in Germany. We have free speech. He goes, you do not have free speech. Yes, we do. We have free. You don't know what you're talking about. I live in Germany. I teach in Germany. We have free speech. He goes, okay, but if I say this, I'll get arrested. Oh, well, yes, because we have crimes against hate speech. And he's like, do you understand that when the government gets to decide what constitutes hate speech, and then they selectively apply it, and we have seen this, not just in Germany, right? We've seen this in places like the UK
and Canada.
So this starts to become a real question on Is there any element of like what, again, Ben Trudeau has laid out with this option that we've been discussing? Is there anything in there that they could swing as, well, this is insurrectionist or hate speech or whatnot? Or
it's a good question. The only thing that comes to mind that could possibly be put in that framing would be if the immigration aspect, control of local immigration, if that got espoused in an unfavorable manner.
So for instance, if they were saying, hey, no immigration from these countries,
exactly,
then all of a sudden, and they, I mean, maybe they could get away with something like terror designations or something like that. But if it didn't fall into that category, that may give an impetus for the federal government either to apply pressure through the media or through the legal system to start trying people or shutting people down for speaking. Okay. So that's important too. It's important for two reasons. One, every movement has to protect itself from elements within its movement that are not truly on board. We see this in the United States. We have people that call themselves America First, when in reality they have a very, very different agenda, and they're simply using America First or MAGA as a vehicle because of similar frustrations. The other thing that you'll see false flag operations. Oh, how do I get this? How do I get this cut down? I set up my little group that has 5 followers on X, but I start putting out all this stuff as if I'm in favor, and now I give the government the opportunity to go in and shut it down.
You saw this in the Freedom Convoy a couple times. RCMP did false flag gun plants, and they did quite a few things where they were
like, one weirdo showed up with a Nazi flag, and all of a sudden, everyone in the Freedom Convoy is a racist.
Yeah.
Okay. So there is and again, and because you don't have a First Amendment, you have the ability to actually.
We don't have a First Amendment. We don't have a Second Amendment.
Yeah. Well, and that was the other thing too that it was funny. There was this debate at the beginning of our founding on whether or not they actually wanted to write out the Bill of Rights. There was a debate over the Bill of Rights from the more conservative side.
Oh wow. Okay.
The anti-federalists. There was I shouldn't say all of them, but there were people that were very, very concerned about the federal government developing a Bill of Rights because they thought, well, then the Bill of Rights will be the only thing protected. And what they thought was the true protection of our liberty was Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution, because that listed out the enumerated powers of the federal government.
Right.
And so the idea was, well, no, we've limited your jurisdiction to these things. If we then start talking about protected rights over here, you're going to start to think these powers are not limited and enumerated. And you're going to start to think that, well, the only thing that you can't touch are the things that we've expressed in the Constitution.
Right.
And we have this issue when we create legislation now. When we try to protect something, one of the arguments will be, well, this has always been kind of protected. If you now specifically state that this is protected, anything that you haven't stated is protected is now potentially on the table.
Yeah.
So that's a method of legal interpretation. It's something to take into. However, I think most Americans now would say, we get what you're saying, but thank God we have a Bill of Rights that was expressly discussed, because what we've learned is the federal government, or the government in general, has a tendency to grow and expand and abuse its power. And it's better to have a bulwark, a very, very clear, written, articulated bulwark against the government being able to intrude on certain things. Because as we've seen in the UK and Canada, when freedom of speech is more a tradition rather than a legally expressed statute,
yes,
it gives the government far more ability to engage in mischief.
Yep.
Okay. Well, listen, I Connor, I really want to thank you for coming on and giving us a firsthand perspective from. We will now release you and allow you to, return to your homeland, or perhaps seek refugee status here in the United States. We'd certainly love to have you, but you will do the legal process, or we'll call Tom right now. Call Tom Homan right now. But no, I appreciate this because, again, Canada has been, very, very similar, values and traditions on the whole, right? When compared with the rest of the world, one of the United States' most important trade partners. We've been allies in multiple conflicts and wars, and there is an interesting question that's playing out right now, both with respect to trade policy between the United States and Canada, the kind of the larger sentiment between Canadians and Americans. And it's fascinating to watch these more conservative areas of Canada really start to kind of exercise their power and consider their options. And I don't think we're not just going to see this phenomenon in Canada. I think that's the other reason why this is important and why Americans should look at this as well and kind of pay close attention, because it's not just about what's happening to an ally. It's about witnessing what happens when you have certain portions of a country that no longer feel effectively represented and in fact feel kind of consistently under attack. And what are the mechanisms available? What are the legal, peaceful mechanisms available to be able to push back against that? And as I look at this option that Ben Trudeau has laid out, this is one that, again, I'm certainly not going to be so bold or arrogant as to assume, for Albertans what they should do. But as someone that has looked very hard at my own constitution and what are the powers that are supposed to be reserved for the states, and how do you use appropriate legal mechanisms to push back against an abusive federal government, I certainly want Albertans to be able to take the options that are going to afford them the same opportunities. I want them to be able to protect that which is uniquely Albertan, along with being Canadian.
Yeah.
I certainly understand anybody that says, look, I take a great deal of pride in being Canadian. I want to be a part of Canada, but the current status quo is not acceptable.
Yeah.
And I don't know, like, again, from an outsider looking in, this seems to be a really good option. And I share your concern that if you get everybody very excited about an option which doesn't have a great deal of chance of success,
mm-hmm.
you potentially sap all that energy that could be used to pursue an option that could have really significant impact.
Yeah.
So that's my take. Christian, do you want to add anything? And then we're going to give Connor the last word.
No, I mean, look, we've talked at length earlier this year about, the situation in Canada with their election, with Trump's tariffs, with him talking about making them a state. And, I said in one of those podcasts, I'm like, we'd love to have you, but that's a choice that
Yeah.
you guys would have to make yourselves. And we actually probably would not love to have all of you. No offense. I don't know if we would love to have, the liberals in the Maritimes.
You don't need more.
What we'd like to
lefties.
do is an exchange program where we give you Vermont, we get Alberta. We give you I'm kidding everyone in Vermont. We just want some of the people in Vermont, like Bernie Sanders. That's what we should do, is a person for person exchange.
Person for person exchange is fine. There's so many Americans who have said, you know what, I don't actually like being an American. I want to go move somewhere. It's like, I'll take your citizenship.
That phenomenon, I've seen that in so many like young men in their teenage and 20-something-year-old years.
Yeah.
Like within our community, we have several people that like live in Canada or live in the UK. That's another example.
Yeah, because we have a mutual friend, Eric. Right?
Yes, we do. And I asked him a few months ago. I'm like, so, what's the economic situation look like? What's the job situation look like? What's the unemployment rate? And he's like, for me, 100%.
And he lives just outside of Toronto.
Yeah. And he didn't just mean that for him, literally. He also meant it for people like in his profile. He's like, he basically said that, look, as a young white guy, I feel like my own country doesn't want me anymore.
Yeah. Yeah.
And there is that strong sentiment for that particular group that like the state just doesn't want those people.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, it's actively discriminating against those people. And I think that what's going to end up happening is, well, one of a couple things. You're either going to get some sort of, collective identity being formed around those characteristics, and that's already happening.
Yeah.
Like you cannot avoid that at this point. When the state, organizations outside the state too, think about the culturally shaping institutions, many of which kind of get state funding.
Mm.
When they all are pushing a certain message, you're bad. Why? Because you're a man, because you're white, because you're a white man. Like,
yeah,
at some point you're going to get pushback on an identity basis. But the other thing too is there's also this, it's not just like the rise of identity politics. There's also this like emergence of despair that you're starting to see, particularly with Zoomers.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And that's not just unique to white guys. That this is also happening with women. This is happening kind of across the board on a generational level. And in Canada, what I see in particular is this loss of identity. I cannot tell you how many like YouTube videos there are, and usually they don't get a lot of views, but there's a lot of them
Mm-hmm.
of just 20-something-year-olds in Canada that are putting out videos of like, I feel like that I don't belong to anything. There's some of them that are like English speakers and they're like living in Quebec and they're like, maybe I would, if there was a referendum on independence, I might actually vote for it, even though I'm English,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because they're just trying to latch on to something that they can call their own. And right now they live in a country where they're being told nothing's your own, right?
Yeah.
It's the whole.
No, in fact,
you will own nothing and be happy.
The people from a completely different culture, political, social, religious tradition that just jumped off the boat yesterday are more Canadian than the people that have lived there their entire lives, according to this liberal government.
I mean, even when I was in school, like we were taught that basically Canada is nothing to be proud of. Globalism is the way to go. We're all descendants of like white colonialist settlers. This
is what you were taught in school.
This is what I was taught in school.
In Alberta?
In Alberta.
It's pretty bad, man.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, I mean, Connor, taking all that into consideration, everything we discussed today, I mean, kind of take us home with like, what's the thing you would love for your fellow Albertans, fellow proud Canadians to kind of understand about this process, what's going to happen, and, you know, what you would like them to either do or consider?
Well, first off, I consider you guys fellow Albertans. You don't have to leave Canada. First off, you don't have to go become American. You don't have to wallow in despair either. There's a genuine option here where we can actually be Canadian. Don't have to go around like being angry or stuff like that. It's like, no, let's just actually go through the legislative process, get people involved, get them informed, and say, hey, we can actually fix our problems. We just actually have to put on our boots and go do some work. And Albertans are usually pretty good at doing that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'll tell you, you guys have you have a federalist system, somewhat like the United States in the sense that there's a lot of provincial rights out there. I had, again, before you brought this up to me, I had no idea that Alberta had an opportunity to, again, remain Canadian, but to assert an Albertan identity, Albertan rules and laws and culture and everything else in a way that really allows them to both maintain that status as Canadian, but insist on being Alberta being able to govern itself the way Albertans want them to, not the way Ottawa wants them to.
Yeah.
And look, it's very encouraging. It's very encouraging. I certainly hope that Albertans, look, again, outside guy, not telling you what to do, just saying, I think there's a lot to respect about Alberta and the things that you guys want to achieve. And I would love to see Albertans pushing back within the legal mechanisms available in order to achieve more of that. So listen, if you're from Canada and you want to opine on this and tell us what we got wrong, or maybe what we're missing, or maybe, you know, try to find out more about this. Again, the article that was written, or the draft that was written, was by Ben Trudeau. The good Trudeau, as we're now affectionately referring to him here at MTA.
The one that doesn't like socialism.
The one that doesn't like socialism. You know, check this out. Maybe it's a good option. Maybe it's something to consider. But again, we really appreciate Connor coming in and giving us his unique perspective on this. We certainly appreciate you watching and all the questions we got from the audience. By the way, if you're someone that would like to ask questions as we're doing these episodes, check out the link in the description. We actually have a whole online community, and we offer them a pregame and a postgame for every podcast that we do. And that's what we're going to do right now. We're going to go ahead and shut off the feed for you guys, and we're about to go into postgame, where we say all the things that would otherwise get us canceled or demonetized. All right. Once again, thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next episode.